This is the Betula papyrifera, also known as paper birch, canoe birch, or white birch. This tree is distributed from Alaska down to northern North America. It ranges from east of the Cascades to the Atlantic coast. It is a close cousin of European birches like silver birch. It grows in moist, open to dense woods, often on slopes, edges of ponds, or streams. Paper birch is a deciduous tree that can grow up to 65 feet, 10 to 12 feet in diameter. The bark is a chalky white color with short horizontal slashes up and down the bark. A characteristic that is somewhat unique to the paper birch is how the bark peels off, resembling paper. Paper birch has bright green leaves that are alternate, the blades narrowly ovate and around 5 centimeters long. The edges are once or twice serrated, and it produces staminate catkins 3 to 5 centimeters long. This tree is a bit rare to see here in the Pacific Northwest, but a lot more abundant east of the Cascades. Paper birch has had many traditional uses. Indigenous groups in the Great Lakes area mainly utilized the bark of the paper birch. It was used for numerous items like weaving baskets, mats, dishes, cookware, or scrolls. The bark was especially good for canoes due to it being waterproof, one of the common names even being canoe birch. Birch has had some medicinal purposes in the past. The sap has been used for digestive issues. The dried birch leaves are also anti-inflammatory. There are many ways birch trees have been consumed throughout history, but even though paper birch has served more of a technological use rather than an edible use in the States, there are still parts that were consumed and still are today. A modern practice utilizing paper birch is making birch syrup, which is what I will be using in my recipe. If you were to tap a birch tree for sap, there is only one time of year you can do that sustainably. The best time is when it is shifting from winter to spring, so around early April. This is when the sap starts to run and will be easiest to harvest. To get birch syrup from sap, you need to tap your birch tree. So here is a little pretend video of me tapping a birch tree. So, as you can see, I am clearly in a birch forest ready to tap a birch tree. I have all of my tools, the spout, a hammer, and my bottle for collecting the sap. You also need a drill, but I could not find one for my demonstration, but my tree already had a bunch of holes, so we're all good. So, what you're going to do is drill a hole about 1.5 inches deep at a slight upwards angle. Then you can hammer in your spout or spile, which should be made of stainless steel, nylon, or plastic. Then the sap should start to drip out. You then attach your bottle or bucket and are ready to collect the sap. In order to harvest sustainably, you must only tap trees that are at least 8 inches in diameter and only tap the same one every 2 to 3 years. Now we are going to move inside and start on our recipe. Alright, so for my recipe I decided to go with some good old sourdough pancakes with birch syrup. So I've laid out all my ingredients, and here is the star of our show, Alaska birch breakfast syrup. So I'm going to get started on mixing up our ingredients. So first, I'm going to measure out 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I had to really speed up these clips because they were quite long. But next we've got 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and then 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And next, I'm going to measure out 1 tablespoon of sugar. And then I go and grab some salt, and I think that was about a teaspoon. And I'm going to whisk that all up, and we're done with our dry ingredients. Now to add the wet ingredients, so I start with the sourdough starter, which I had measured out in the jar about a cup, and I add in all of that. So if you don't have any sourdough starter, there's other recipes you can do, but I highly recommend trying it with sourdough. It makes these pancakes like super fluffy and way more flavorful than any regular pancakes. So next I'm going to measure out 1.5 cups of milk. I've got lactose-free milk right there, but you can use any kind. You could probably even use plant-based milk. And then I'm gonna crack open 1 large egg and whisk it up and pour it into the batter. And then final ingredient, well, not our final ingredient, but 2 tablespoons of sunflower oil. And now for our final ingredient, I put about 2 teaspoons of birch syrup, but later I add more, so I would say it's more around 1 tablespoon of birch syrup. Now I'm gonna mix that all up, and after that, we are ready to get cooking with our pancakes. There's our final batter, and now we're gonna move on over to the stove. Okay, hello, there's me, and I've got my skillet going. It got pretty hot, so I recommend keeping the heat pretty low if you're using a skillet, or just use a regular pan. That works fine too, but I want it to be fancy. So this is pretty much just a time lapse of me flipping pancakes, so I thought I would share some more facts about birch trees. So in stores you generally won't see birch syrup, and it's also quite pricey, and the reason why is because it takes a ton of sap to make a really small amount of syrup. It takes 110 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of birch syrup. In comparison, maple syrup, it takes about 40 gallons of maple sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup, so that's why you would more commonly see maple syrup in stores. Birch sap is not just utilized to make syrup, but is also drunk as a general tonic. This was done by indigenous groups in Alaska, and they also would make tea out of birch leaves. With other birch species in Europe, making tonic out of the sap is a really common practice, and I've heard it's overall very refreshing and a really yummy spring treat. My final fact is that paper birch bark was harvested in the spring, and it would actually come off the tree in large sheets like paper, and I thought that was pretty cool. Alright, so that is my final pancake, I believe. I can assure you these were super delicious and really fluffy, and overall they were really fun to make, easy to make, and really delicious. So thank you all for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two about birch trees. I certainly did. And see you next time. Bye.